Hi everyone, if you enjoyed the video then I think you would like my short collection of short stories and full-length paranormal thriller available now on Amazon. Be sure to subscribe and become a channel member. Enjoy the video. Now I've played a lot of games in my time, and while there are any number of them which I hold pretty close to my heart, some of which I've banged on about enough to last a lifetime, there is one series which I have solely neglected. Now while they may not actually be my favourite games of all time, they may very well be the ones which mean the most to me personally. And with the arrival of their long overdue remasters, I felt it was finally time to show my appreciation. Of course, I am speaking of none other than the Tomb Raider series, games which have marked seminal points of my life, charting ups and downs and forever being a feature in my constantly changing world. So I'm going to break the cardinal rule here and show my age on the internet by admitting that my history with Tomb Raider goes right back to the very beginning, before even the first game was released, in the form of an old school demo disc, where we got the first taste of the game which would arguably revolutionise gaming like nothing had since Doom. Honestly though, initial impressions in my household were not so great, given that neither my mum nor anybody else we knew could figure out the controls or how to navigate the entirely 3D map, prompting most of them to give up before they managed to kill the first couple of wolves. Then it was my turn, and after a few cheap deaths to a jump scare bear, I was away. And I'm pretty sure that at 8 years old, I was better at video games than I am now, because not only did I manage to get past the first few enemies, but I figured out what needed to be done to complete the level, and even made that particularly tricky jump my mum had spent the past week raging over. Now, while the puzzles of the first Tomb Raider game may not seem all that complex to us today, despite still being pretty obtuse at times, believe me when I say that back then they were like nothing we had ever encountered, and given the fact that we were still wrestling with a whole new form of gameplay, every puzzle we solved made us feel like geniuses. Suffice to say that after my mum's husband at the time unilaterally bought a Sega Saturn, we obviously insisted that we at least get Tomb Raider for it. From that point on, the game became an almost bonding experience with my mum, as we tried to figure out the puzzles together, including lots of scribbled maps and notes for the levers in Palace Midas. I remember badgering her every day after school to see if she had gotten any further, not realising at the time that adults kind of had other things to do during the day other than sit around and play video games. I especially remember us finishing Sanctuary of the Scion late one night while waiting to leave on a trip to visit my grandfather. We knew we should have left it there, but couldn't help but start in Atla's minds, causing us to spend the next week obsessing how to get Lara's pistols back and no way to actually try out our ideas. Seeing as back then, games were somewhat less portable than they are today. Then there was the giant torso Atlantean thing, which became something of a meme in my household, long before memes were even a thing. Everything managed to get referenced back to this thing, and to this day I'm not entirely sure how we managed it. Even when we had finished the game, we promptly restarted it all over again so we could race one of my mum's friends to see who could finish the game first. As with everything so entrenched in someone's life though, the memories are never always entirely good ones, as I remember it was upon booting up the Saturn to play through the Lost Valley as part of this race that my mum's husband started an argument which would invariably lead to him leaving and never coming back. I don't remember how the race ended, I'm not even sure it did. I just remember thinking that the game didn't seem all that important anymore. Naturally, it wasn't the game itself which was the problem, but more what it had come to represent. Lucky for me, however, core design was hard at work on the sequel, which everyone at my school instantly became completely obsessed over. I can still hear the way my old friend would say Marco Bartoli in the most jank Italian accent I've ever heard, before proceeding to brag about how he found the grenade launcher before anybody else. Come to think about it, he managed to figure out most things before anybody else, and would always be completely insufferable about it. Anybody would think he was using a walkthrough, which, believe me, in the 90s was a feat unto itself. You'd either have to spend loads on the official guide, pick up tidbits from magazines, or use the ridiculously unreliable dial-up internet, which would probably be completely inaccurate anyway. Remembering back the way he said Maria Doria and Catacombs of the Talion are also burned into my memory as well. Strange what kind of stuff you hold on to. Now, even though I don't have nearly as many vivid memories about initially playing Tomb Raider 2 as I do with the first, I can't help but have an extra level of fondness for it. I'm not sure whether it's just that I loved how much it added to the formula, how much the first level stepped up and instantly slapped you in the face, or whether it was just because the entire experience was so charming. Yes, I'm looking at you, Venice, but I might go so far as to say that Tomb Raider 2 was the most Tomb Raider game of them all, and maybe even my favourite, despite ironically not having that many actual tombs. Of course, that's not to dismiss what would come next, because by the time Tomb Raider 3 came out, my mum had a new boyfriend, one who had not only upgraded our PC to play video games properly, but had also introduced the far too young and impressionable Nick to the wonders of Doom and Quake. Suffice to say that having a gamer on hand got us day one access to Lara's new adventure, among other things, while I quickly really learned that classism, of all things, existed in the gaming community. You see, Tomb Raider 1 had this feature on PlayStation where you can only save your game at crystals spread throughout the level, and given that I'd only ever played the PC and Sega Saturn versions, where you could save whenever the hell you wanted, I was kind of thrown through a loop when they showed up in the PC version of Tomb Raider 3, acting as instant health packs. It was at this point where I had it explained to me that PCs were simply superior to console in every way, shape and form, and my induction to the PC Master Race began. As for Tomb Raider 3 itself, given the considerable step up in difficulty, it took me a while to actually play through the game in its entirety, opting instead to spend most of my time bumming around Lara's house and discovering the assortment of secrets hidden therein. And trust me, there were quite a few. And yes, of course, I did lock Winston in the freezer. Didn't we all? Eventually though, I did finally set to and experience Lara's globe-trotting adventure in its entirety, getting eaten by piranhas in India, run over by trains in London, blown up dinosaurs in the South Pacific, and getting all my guns taken away in Nevada, because yes, I was unlucky enough to be one of the poor souls who did Nevada last on his first playthrough, and was left woefully underprepared for Antarctica. I have no idea how, but I managed to make it to the huge mutant spider, but by the time I did, I had nothing. Not a damn thing other than my pistols and a plucky attitude. Fair to say that I did not finish Tomb Raider 3 on my first playthrough, and even now the thought of that final battle haunts my dreams. Still, the pure adventure the third game takes you on is something else, and really stands out against its predecessors. It is now, however, that Lara and her jaunts through ancient and forgotten environments would begin to change. Until now, the games had basically been more or less the same, but with new and more impressive stuff tacked on. But the last revelation felt as though it was different, like it was a crescendo of sorts to the Tomb Raider series. And in a way, it kind of was, because by all accounts, this was meant to be the last one. Gone was the classic passport loading screen. Gone was the globe-trotting quest, focusing instead entirely on an Egyptian adventure. And gone was composer Nathan McCree. And while Peter Connolly did a great job with the soundtrack, the difference in musical tone only served to highlight the air of change. Of course, none of this stopped me from playing it all of Christmas morning, making us late for a dinner we were meant to go to, but hey, I'll take memories of spike puzzles and spinning rooms over a family meal with people who weren't actually my family any day. Now, despite getting the game at Christmas 1999, I didn't actually play through it to completion until a couple of years later, during what I remember to be an especially warm summer that had the backing track to my mother's questionable pop CDs. I swear, normally she has much better taste, but for that one summer, it was all Anastasia and other assorted early noughties one-hit wonders. As for the game, it became almost a therapeutic experience, the details largely missing from my memory replaced only with a distinct sense of contentment, a thing I found ever harder to recapture as I've gotten older. That's not to say that there weren't standout moments. The ruins at Alexandria and the Egyptian adventure especially come to mind, not to mention that damn motorbike level where literally everything killed me and then I got eaten by a giant snake. Not to lie though, if it meant I could listen to that banger of a boss theme again, then it was all worth it. What's more is that I've only just now found out this track was originally meant for Tomb Raider 3, but was used for The Last Revelation instead. Not really that important, but it's just funny how the franchise can continue to surprise me even when I'm writing a script about how much it's impacted me over the years. Anyways, before I knew it, the game was coming to a close, and with it, as far as I knew at the time, so was my time with the entire Tomb Raider series, because this was the game where they dared to kill off Lara Croft. Or at least that was the plan initially, because somehow she was back again a year later, with some of the greatest hits of her solo career. Although I think the closure given in The Last Revelation may have worked a little too well, on me at least, given that I didn't actually know there was such a thing as Tomb Raider Chronicles until quite a while after its release, and even then I thought it was just some kind of cobbled together expansion consisting of bonus levels and cut content, similar really to how I saw Unfinished Business, when my mum's boyfriend at the time brought it home for Tomb Raider 1. More for me then, because Chronicles, despite not quite having the heart of its predecessors, had some pretty interesting ideas. A standout to me being the creepy weaponless Ireland levels. We even get some sort of background lore around Lara's relationship with other hired guns, who we would inevitably hunt down and murder in other adventures. Still, I guess it stings a little that Chronicles is the only classic Tomb Raider game that I technically missed, so to say, although I was sure to make up for it when the next game came around, because despite it being full of jank, it actually ended up being kind of a big deal to me. Whereas The Last Revelation had felt like an ending, and Chronicles a sort of encore, Angel of Darkness felt like a rebirth. And of course, the overall darker and edgier tone of the entry went over extremely well with my 15-year-old self. Now yes, I know the game was rushed, it's full of bugs and questionable design choices, and is more or less the reason why core design closed its doors, but I really quite like it. Maybe it's that 15-year-old part of me still whispering in my ear, or maybe it's the fact that, despite all its issues, Angel of Darkness tried something distinctly new, while still remaining quintessentially Tomb Raider. And not only that, but tried to tell a complex story, tying in previous games and particularly presenting Lara at its centre as an actual character rather than the acrobatic gun-wielding maniac we all ended up playing her as. I remember the rainy Parisian alleys and snowy streets of Prague being incredibly charming in their own way, the fantastical story of fallen angels inspiring to my young mind, and the noir-style murder mystery appealing to that side of me that just loves a good private investigation drama. Another reason I'm pretty fond of this game could be that it was sort of an escape. When things got difficult, and they did get a bit hard to handle there in my teenage years, I could always lose myself on the PS2, either by playing this or Half-Life for the 10th time, usually while blasting Significant Other by Limp Bizkit. And I don't care what anybody says, I still unironically love that album. Despite its failure to live up to most people's expectations though, Angel of Darkness still holds up in my opinion as the rebirth of Tomb Raider, in many ways informing the style the next entry would take. An entry which may or may not be in the same continuity, because while most see Legend as the beginning of its own separate series, I'm pretty sure there's nothing that serious which precludes it from being in the same canon. Admittedly, this is probably because the classic games were pretty damn vague about their backstory, but I can appreciate that you could treat Legend's story as a kind of clarification of Lara's history, rather than an outright retcon. It's just a shame then that I didn't like the game very much. I'll grant you it's fun in its own right, and handled pretty well. I especially like that you can do a string of flippy spinny shit to get through traps just by spamming the jump button, but ultimately it didn't feel like Tomb Raider for me. It was like Crystal Dynamics had made their own Tomb Raider inspired game and simply slapped on the name for brand recognition. Now while it was very fun to slice and dice everything in sight with Excalibur, the astral laser sword of destiny, it is from this point on that games begin to mean less to me on an emotional level. Partly I suppose because by now I was leaving my formative years, and partly because Tomb Raider was no longer really the Tomb Raider I knew, being instead a shadow of what it was when I was growing up, and I don't think any of the games could really demonstrate that better than Tomb Raider Anniversary. I say then, with no hyperbole, that I really don't like this game. And I'm sure it's an irrational dislike, but it doesn't stop it from being true. Given everything I've waxed lyrical about regarding the first game being so important to me and my mum's relationship, I was quite excited to get my hands on Anniversary to start with, and play an updated version of the old favourite. Things did not start out well then, when I had to deal with the way the new Tomb Raider games handled locking onto enemies, something I always felt to be way too arcadey for Tomb Raider. What's more was that QuickTime events were back from Legend, and let me put it this way, they are probably the main reason that to this day I have never played God of War. At the time though, I figured it is what it is, and that these were the mechanics simply popular during the period, and everything will be okay so long as the overall gameplay and environments are solid and loyal to the original. What's that? They've been redesigned as to be barely recognisable and trade away all of the personality and life in service of making them more realistic, despite the fact all the characters look like cartoons. I think it was the Lost Valley which really nailed the coffin shut for me. Instead of the nerve-wracking jaunt through a prehistoric valley in search of vital components to an ancient machine, constantly at risk of being jumped by dinosaurs, in Anniversary you simply wander in, stand in place and shoot half a dozen suicidal raptors before having to make the T-Rex run into a wall a few times. Beyond that, there's nothing more to the level, and what's more is that the rest of the game continues on like this, turning timeless levels with palpable atmosphere into milquetoast versions of themselves. I mean, they got rid of the pulsating flesh walls in Atlantis. Sure, it horrified me as a kid, but that's what made it special. Now I'll grant you that the part where you're escaping after getting the first part of a ski-on and Qualopec wakes up and lunges for you was pretty cool, but that's a very rare occurrence and something the game sorely needed more of. Regardless of what I say though, my friend at university seemed to like it well enough, so much to the extent that he would spend hours sitting in the corner of my room playing it on my PlayStation, quietly swearing to himself when he couldn't make a jump and refusing to go back to his own room when I was tired. Those were the days when you could stay up half the night playing video games with not but a care in the world. Sure, we only got like 3 hours of sleep and had to go to lectures in the morning, but it's honestly better than the rat race of the real world, that's for damn sure. All in all, in a lot of ways, I think Anniversary may have broken me when it came to Tomb Raider, because when Underworld came out, despite promising the return of Natla, I made absolutely no efforts to play it, and in fact, have never actually played it to this day. So yeah, take my badge of fandom if you must, because if not blindly loving every single entry of a franchise makes me a bad fan, then I am indeed a bad fan. So the Legend trilogy came to an end with not that much fanfare, and even the second reboot came and went without me paying much attention, although that may have been more because I didn't actually have a computer capable of rendering Lara's new, ridiculously realistic, for the time, hair. At this point it could be argued that, after keeping it close to my heart for the better part of my entire life, I may have finally parted ways with Tomb Raider. Until, that is, I found out about a certain Kickstarter. I remember it being late one night, my wife was already asleep, and I was aimlessly scrolling through Twitter. back when it was Twitter, as all millennials do to escape the existential dread of the wee hours, when I came upon a tweet from Nathan McCree, the original composer of the first 3 Tomb Raider games. The tweet was promoting a Kickstarter campaign for the envisioned Tomb Raider suite, a collection which would re-record the legendary music of Tomb Raiders 1, 2 and 3. Naturally, without a second of hesitation, I hurried downstairs to find my wallet, and promptly sank an amount of money into it I shall not disclose, just in case certain spouses are watching. Suffice to say, it was one of the higher tiers, which offered, among other things, a vinyl set, signed merchandise, and a CD version of the suite, which, for old time's sake, I would of course reserve for my mum. Little did I know that this would start a sort of revival of our shared love of Tomb Raider, and help us relive some of the better moments of my childhood. As with most Kickstarter campaigns, the estimated fulfillment date came and went and dwindled into memory, and for the most part, I kind of forgot all about it for a while there. That was, other than on occasion getting a pang of random regrets when I remembered about missing out on the 20th anniversary live performance of the suite, but I'd always managed to come up with some reason or other why I couldn't have gone in the first place and try to move on. But then it was announced. They were doing another live performance, and once again there was no hesitation as I hurried to my wallet and quickly bought 2 tickets. Once more, I shall redact exactly how much those tickets cost, but this time simply because I genuinely can't remember. Besides, I think the train ticket to London was more than the actual performance, so... Now, my wife has never been a big fan of Tomb Raider, so I suppose it worked out quite well, given that I doubt my mother would have ever forgiven me if I had taken anyone but her. So off we headed to London, seeing the sights, eating one of the better cannolis I've ever tasted, and then heading to the performance, which was, of course, incredible. The crisp, live renditions of the music I'd adored for decades, the nostalgic game footage, complete with choreographed lighting, and briefly meeting the man himself, Nathan McCree. Everything combined made it feel like we had come full circle. Where both my mum and I had once many years ago sat and enjoyed Tomb Raider together, we were able to once again. As if things couldn't get any better, however, it was here where I was afforded the chance to meet one of the best Tomb Raider content creators out there, and the guy who coined the phrase macho broccoli, Steve of War. And of course, like the bumbling socially inept doofus I am, I bungled the entire interaction. So Steve, if you're watching, it was indeed a pleasure to meet you, and I'm very sorry for being only marginally better with people than an ill-tempered Atlantean. Ultimately, Tomb Raider has been with me for a long time, giving me some of my best memories and helping me through some of my worst. It was, and having finally played the new games, still is a constant in my life. And while the Survivor trilogy doesn't quite have the same special place in my heart as the classic games, they still somehow managed to fill, even just a little bit, the niche carved out by the originals. The 2013 game, with all its hair-based wizardry and brutal death animations, still had the mystical elements and out-of-left-field puzzles that always made for such frustrating entertainment. Rise of the Tomb Raider, although being my least favourite of the new series, had that whole section at the beginning, which was quintessentially Tomb Raider, and Shadow was probably, in my opinion, the most Tomb Raider the franchise has been in years, managing to give me back some of that lost Tomb Raider vibe right at the end. When playing these games, it felt almost as though all the decor had been changed and the furniture had been replaced, but ultimately, I had still come home. Now with the remaster of the classic trilogy, and the promise of a new game restoring some of the original paintwork, maybe Tomb Raider will feel more homely than ever. But then, times always change, and at some point or another, we all must find a nest, leaving what we loved for next generation, to do with it as they see fit. Maybe they'll do something good with it, maybe they won't. Ultimately, the most we can hope is that they have as much love for it as we did. Thanks for watching everyone. While you're here, don't forget to check out my books on Amazon if you're into that kind of thing. Like, subscribe, all of that other lovely jazz, and of course have a great day.